We're going to talk about the climate crisis. And, some people are calling it, well, it's global warming and no big deal. It's a big deal. And so we want to talk about it as a crisis because it really is. This first picture you're seeing is a picture of our beautiful planet taken from space. We are fortunate because throughout human history, people were never able to really see the planet, see its beauty, see it in space with all the oceans and continents. You see a picture now of the atmosphere, and you realize, we look up and we see the sky, and it looks like it goes on forever, but it's actually a very thin membrane around our Earth. So how does this work? The sun radiates energy, which comes into the Earth and warms the planet. We know that other planets we see out there are frigid because they don't have that warming, so that life can't exist. Most of this radiation comes into the Earth and is absorbed by the Earth. Some of it bounces back out, particularly if it hits something like Antarctica, where they have all this bright white snow surface and ice. Much of that radiation will just sort of bounce back out into space. But why they call it the greenhouse effect, how a greenhouse works. Light comes in, heats the greenhouse, but because the glass is arranged in such a way, the light can't bounce back out again. The heat can't bounce back out again, and so you really have this warming taking place in the greenhouse. Well, what happens when you have concentrations of carbon dioxide, CO2, is it really acts like a greenhouse. It creates a layer in the atmosphere that traps that heat energy from escaping back out into space, and just like a greenhouse, the Earth gets warmer. What are the things that create this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Well, there's all kinds of things. Industrial processes, coal plants, airplanes, cars, animals, which we don't recognize a lot, but in our factory farming, these animals produce an enormous amount of methane. Methane is actually 60 times worse than carbon dioxide in terms of trapping atmospheric gases and trapping heat in the atmosphere. And of course, we're having significant melting of a lot of, the sea ice in the Arctic. Glaciers are melting, so a lot less of these nice white bright surfaces to send things back out, heat back out into space. The largest source of global warming pollution is the burning of fossil fuels. And you really see in the atmosphere between 1850, which was really the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, to today, this slide goes up to 2018, this dramatic rise of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that's what's really causing global warming. And that's what's causing the climate crisis. Greenland, for example, this huge island covered with ice. And this was in 2019. 2 days ago, 60% of the surface of Greenland's ice sheet experienced melting, losing more than 10 billion tons of ice in a single day. I was recently in Greenland. You can really see these glaciers they would be, the ice would be calving in the sea. Now, the glaciers are back 35 kilometers. There's been that much melting, and it's happening very, very rapidly, and obviously changing the whole traditional lifestyle of people who live in Greenland. Another example, this is the Department of Energy and Biology at Princeton University. Climate change is disrupting natural ecosystems in a way that is making life better for infectious diseases. And here we are with the coronavirus, a worldwide pandemic, which to some extent is accelerated by global warming. Worldwide air pollution kills 9 million people a year. And this is, again, all this stuff that we're using the atmosphere as a garbage dump. So we're dumping all these pollutants into the atmosphere, causing the climate to change, but also causing all of us breathing this noxious stuff that we're putting into the atmosphere. So this slide will show you how does climate change affect the food supply, because we're having problems in terms of, as the climate warms, the plants that you could grow in a certain environment no longer grow there because the season starts too soon, it gets too hot, there's too much rain. All these disruption in the climate make it more problematical to grow our food supply. So floods, drought, disease, heat, pests, fires, water availability becoming much less in some areas. So these are all things, and toxins that go into the ground that make our food supply much more problematical. Here's one from 2014 from the Department of Defense. You wouldn't think the Department of Defense would be looking at climate change, but they are. They think it is a national security threat, and this is their quote. Climate change will likely lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, and here we are with a pandemic disease, disputes over refugees and resources, and destruction by natural disasters in regions around the globe. Here's one that shocked me. The heat index in Bandar, Iran, reached 165 degrees Fahrenheit on July 31st, 2015. Human beings can't live in that kind of heat. So we've seen fires in California. We've seen floods all over the United States and in many other countries. And this slide that I'm showing you now really shows the change in climate. You'll see that green curve, which shows you what the average temperature was. And then you'll see how the whole curve has shifted over so that now the extreme temperature events used to cover just 1/10 of 1% of the Earth. Now they cover 14%. So these extreme temperature things caused by the climate crisis and global warming. So scientists have been telling us for 30 years or longer, in some cases, that this climate crisis is coming at us and that we are continuing to exacerbate it primarily by not dealing with the burning of fossil fuels. That's where about 70 to 80% of it is coming from. There are other sources as well, but those, if we could reduce our fossil fuel burning, we would be on the way to doing something about this crisis. I think there was one statistic where there are 30 companies that are responsible for 50% of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We do have a choice. We don't have to become climate nihilist, which is like there's nothing we can do about it. It's so big a problem. And let's talk about therapeutic communities, because we're focused on people's problems. We really emphasize living a different way, a more responsible way, a more thoughtful way. People who have addiction problems are selfish, isolated, thinking primarily about themselves. As people come into the therapeutic community, we learn what George DeLeon has called right living, which is really being responsible and thinking about others. So we talk about personal honesty and integrity, accepting responsibility for our behavior instead of just blaming other people, and taking actions to help others. So here we have this incredible crisis, facing all of us who are human beings. I said to people say, this isn't my issue. And I say, if you eat food, breathe air, and drink water, this is your issue. It's an issue for every one of us on the planet. So what can we do? And what should we do? So we're going to talk about 3 practical steps. Education, safeguarding, and connection and action. Those are really the 3 things that we need to focus on. So education means that we want to have every person in our teaching and therapeutic communities aware of the climate crisis, what causes it, which we've talked about, where are we today, what's coming at us, what's the future look like, and what are the things that we can do individually, what are the things we can do collectively, and what are the things we can do in the larger community to do something about this. There's a lot of material available. I mean, we have a plethora of books, blogs, TV shows, about the climate crisis. You can sign up online and get stuff daily about what's happening in our world. So safeguarding. Well, in order to safeguard, we kind of have to know what do we expect to happen. So we're looking at extreme weather. And in one of our earlier slides we showed there's a lot more of that occurring because of global warming. So more heat and paradoxically more cold in some cases. More rain and more drought. So these extremities of weather are what we can expect. Of course, the heat is going to be just kind of a constant until we do something about this. Fires. Things get warmer, things dry out, things burn. We've seen that all over the world, in the United States, and we just recently saw Australia where half the country was on fire. Food shortages, and we talked a little bit about that. How does climate change affect our ability to grow food? Power interruptions, okay, we saw that recently in California. You have these huge wildfires and the whole power grid goes out. Air and water pollution, we talked about that earlier. 9 million people a year dying from air pollution. Water shortages, and of course increased disease, which we're kind of in the middle of right now. But many of the diseases that are located in certain climates, as the climate changes, those diseases move, okay? So many of the diseases that we know of that are tropical could move into the northern hemisphere as the climate continues to warm. Social, financial, and political volatility. Climate refugees, people who there's no food, or terrible droughts for a decade. People will flee those countries, and we're really seeing that. We've been seeing that for the last decade. And that, of course, creates a lot of instability. And some cases can be an excuse for very repressive governments that really go more toward an authoritarian and away from a democratic government. So the exacerbation of inequality as some areas of the world, particularly in many cases the poorest places in the world suffer the most, have contributed the least to climate change and suffer the most. So what should we do in terms of safeguarding? What are the actions that we should take? Well, at all of our campuses, we should really try and get solar power. so that if there are interruptions, first of all, it's good for the climate. It's good for the planet to go away from fossil fuels. And the other part of it is, of course, when the power grid goes down, to have a community of 50 or 100 or 200 people without power, which of course means that all of your cold food storage goes down. I mean, all kinds of terrible things going to happen. Communication systems go down, whatever. So having solar power is really a good idea. It's good to have generators or batteries. So that, if when the sun's not shining, if you either have to have a battery so you're storing that power, or you have to have a generator so you can run at least some power in nights. Water shortages, so rain harvesting is really a great idea that we should do at all of our campuses, as well as water conservation. Emergency food storage is really important. As we're experiencing right now in the middle of this coronavirus situation, people go crazy, They start, hitting the stores and cleaning them totally out, and there's no food available. Well, it's one thing for a family of 2 or 4 to be facing a food shortage. It's another thing for a campus of 200 people to be facing a food shortage. So we really need to have backup supplies of food and do organic gardening at all of our campuses. I mean, some of them lend themselves to that because we have more physical space. Other campuses, we can do urban gardening. That's really becoming something that is done in a lot of our urban environments now. And you can grow a lot of good, nutritious food in an urban environment. Cooling and heating systems are really going to be important because of these extremes. Flood preparation. And you may think, well, we're in a desert, so what are we worried about? Or we're in an area that's never flooded before. Just a few years ago, Houston got 50 inches of rain in 24 hours. Okay? That's that much. Okay? So, and it of course, when you have these rain bombs, no matter where you're located, you've got flooding and flood damage. Diet change. One of the things is if we're facing more disease and more difficulties in that area, what do we want to do? We want to build our immune system. And what's the best way to build our immune system? Well, one of the best ways is a plant-based diet, to get away from animal products, which are inflammatory. And additionally, when we move to a plant-based diet away from animal, then we're also not supporting these factory farms that are so kind of disgusting for the animals and are producing so much methane gas. We have to prepare for disease and medical emergencies. And again, here we are with this coronavirus, and well, we don't really have the supplies. We're not really prepared for this. So particularly in our communities, we really need to have the backup. We need to have the gloves. We need to have the masks. We need to have the toilet paper. We need to have all the protective gears. We need to have a place to quarantine people. We need to have the thermometers so we can tell people whether they're feverish or not. And when a vaccine is available, we want to have access to those vaccines or drugs that'll help in diseases. It's important for us to really think about air and water pollution at all of our campuses. Can we incorporate filtration of our water, filtration of air, particularly places, some of our campuses are right next to a freeway, where there's a lot of air pollution. How can we filter that air to protect our students and our faculty? Let's use hybrid or electric vehicles whenever possible. Let's use, except in a case when you have a pandemic, public transportation, which is much less polluting because you've got a lot more people in a vehicle. And then the other thing is really training our faculty and our students for all these eventualities. So we're not caught flat-footed and totally unprepared when they occur. Well, suppose we do all these things. What else can we do? Well, this is the third point. This is connection and action. We should get involved with local organizations. There's a lot of organizations in every community that are really working on the climate crisis. And we need to be connecting with them for two reasons. One, how they may be able to help us in a crisis, because they have resources we don't have. And how can we help them in a crisis, because we may have resources that we can share and be good neighbors in our communities. And we've got to get involved with national organizations and international organizations. We want to encourage our students and our faculty to belong to these organizations, to speak up about the climate crisis and to be part of the solution and not neutral, because in some ways there's no neutrality in this. You're either working on helping to deal with this crisis or you're ignoring it, in which case you're part of the problem. Voting, we're very fortunate. We can vote, and we should vote for people who will really represent our best interest. And our best interest is to do something about this crisis. So we've got to have politicians who are not just thinking about who put money in their pocket most recently, which in many cases are the very industries that are creating this problem. And they're thinking more about the health and welfare of us, citizens. We should encourage all of our faculty and all of our students who can. Some students can't. They have felony charges and the state doesn't allow them to vote. But every student who can should leave Amity as a voter. And all of our faculty should be voting, because we should be role modeling active citizenship for our students as well as for our families. The other thing, and we had a year or so ago, we had Ellis Jones came, who has done this remarkable work for about 30 years on where he says every dollar is a vote. Okay, so you may only get to vote in an election every 2 years or every 4 years, but every day you go to the store, you're voting. You're telling that company that you're buying from that you like what they're doing and you want them to continue it. Because if you stop buying from them, or we all stop buying from them, they go out of business. So, but how do we know which are the responsible companies and which are the ones that are planet criminals, climate criminals? We don't. It's very hard because that's not on the label. So somebody like Ellis, and there's other organizations too, and you'll see on this slide some other organizations that rate these companies in terms of their impact in terms of global warming, their impact in terms of social justice, how they treat their employees, and other factors that are really important for us. And then when you go to the store using Ellis's book, Better World Shopper, or an app that he has on your phone, or some of these other resources that are available, you can reward the good companies and tell them, we like what you're doing. We like the fact that you're socially responsible. We like that you're environmentally responsible. So we're going to vote with our dollars for you, and we're going to avoid this other company that may be producing a similar product but is a climate criminal. So we know that in addiction, recovery, right living is getting out of denial. First, you got to admit, I've got a problem. Recognizing the effects that you're having on other people, because most people are saying, well, hey, I'm ruining my life, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, but it's my life, and I have a right to do that. You don't. You really begin to recognize as you live in community that you are having an effect on other people. Getting involved with something larger than yourselves. And of course, when we live in community, we start feeling, hey, I'm part of something much bigger, and I have a responsibility. And then developing a new narrative for yourself. So instead of this narrative of I'm on a destruction course, or my life doesn't matter, or whatever, we begin to develop a narrative of I am important. My life does mean something. I can make a difference. I think one of the things we learn in the therapeutic community is not only do we have efficacy to change our own lives, but we are all the time playing a very important role in helping other people change their lives, which gives us dignity and gives us the beginning of a new narrative about our life, which is very important. So dealing with the climate crisis is very much right living today. So you have to ask yourself, looking at this realistically, instead of avoiding it, like a lot of people have their heads in the sand, and because the climate crisis hasn't affected them today, and they don't think it's going to affect them tomorrow, they kind of ignore it. Well, it's somebody else's problem. For us to really recognize, no, it's not somebody else's problem. It's our problem, individually and collectively. So the question I leave you with is, what can you do? And what will you do? Because if you do nothing, you're really part of the problem. But living in a therapeutic community, you not only have your individual efficacy, but we have our collective efficacy. We're talking to therapeutic communities around the world, around the planet, and saying, hey, let's all work on this together. So instead of being an individual or being just part of maybe a few hundred or maybe a few thousand individuals, we may be part of 1 million or more individuals around the planet doing things every day that make a difference. Therapeutic communities, we buy a lot of stuff, in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in the United States. Think of all the purchasing power. If we all were rewarding those good companies and punishing by not rewarding the climate criminal companies, we would be making a significant difference, and we should do that.